Buckle up. Have I got a synchronicity story for you? So, when people say to me, what interests you the most about the past life regression work that you do? Or what interests you the most about working with mediumship or with whatever? I always say I'm most fascinated by synchronicity. It's the way in which the universe uses space to create experiences for us. Now, I've often heard from one of my spiritual teachers, Carissa Shoemaker, you know, humans work in time, but we work with space. And so this is how they can orchestrate the most insane situations. So if you are interested in the absolutely insane thing that happened to me, buckle up, stick with me. It's going to take me a little bit of time to explain it. The last time I made a video, I was sitting in a bathtub I wasn't taking a bath. I was just sitting there making the video because it was a quiet place. I was sitting in a bathtub in the hotel in New Orleans, and I was super grumpy because my flight was canceled. And I said, I'm sure the universe has some goddamn reason for why my flight is canceled, but I was really wanting to go home. And so I tried to find the grace within myself and the, sort of intelligence somehow within myself, the patience to say, okay, fine, there's some spiritual reason why, my flight was canceled, whatever. So the next day, so we had a whole full another day to do stuff. So my partner said to me, hey, let's go out to lunch at Galatoire's, which is a very nice restaurant in New Orleans. Very nice, very old school kind of place. So I was like, fine, we'll go to Galatoire's. So if we had not had a canceled flight, we would not have gone to Galatoire's. So now I'm going to go back almost 50 years. So about 50 years ago, not quite 50, a little bit less, I'm not quite that old. I was in college and I was living in New York City, and I lived in the East Village. Now, if you know anything about the East Village and about New York City in around 1979, 1980, around in there, 1978, the streets were full of, kind of punks, and, you'd always see like Richard Hell walking down the street, or we'd go to CBGB's and we'd see the Ramones. We'd go to the Mud Club. It was a time, my friend Peter lived in the same building as Chris Byrne from, Talking Heads. Anyway, so I was living in New York City. I had a little apartment on First Avenue between First Avenue between 9th and 10th Street. And it was a 4-bedroom apartment with, the bathtub was in the kitchen. It was called a railroad apartment. So it's an apartment where you have 4 little tiny rooms kind of running along next to each other. It was filthy. It was pretty dangerous. It cost $125 a month. And I was going to Sarah Lawrence College, so I would commute on the train or get a ride with some teachers or friends or whatever there. And I was going out with this man who ended up becoming my first husband. His name is Charlie. So I was going out with him, and he was practically my first boyfriend. I really had almost no boyfriends before that. I was like 19 years old or whatever. And he fascinated me because, he was so brilliant. He'd gone to Phillips Academy at Andover. He had gone to Yale. He knew everything about the Kennedy assassination. He was flamboyant. He was kind of nuts. But, I was just completely taken in by him and fell madly in love with him. And one afternoon, we were walking down the street, and there was a man walking towards us with dark hair and kind of glasses. And Charlie absolutely got excited. He was like, Peter, Peter. And it turned out to be his best friend from boarding school and college. They had gone to boarding school and college together. And Peter was visiting from New Orleans. He was living down there. And he was an artist. And Peter was introduced to me, and Charlie said, "This is my new girlfriend, Mary, but she's not going to be around very long," which was not very nice to say. He said it behind my back, but it was true. I only stuck with him for about a year, and I only stuck with him that long probably because I got pregnant and had a baby. So anyway, I met Peter, and Peter and I were like, hello. And then Peter went back to New Orleans to live. And he actually returned to New York about a year later to live. And he's the one who lived in the same building as Chris Byrne. And he worked on his art. Anyway, when he came back to New York from New Orleans, he and I became like best friends. Nothing romantic or anything, but just best friends. In fact, he came to the hospital on the day that my first son was born, and he became my little Charlie's godfather. And so Peter and I we'd watch baseball together. We'd go to art shows together. We would talk for hours. And he was very kind to me when I broke up with my husband. And over the years, we stayed in touch off and on. But it was very funny because when we ran into Peter, Charlie told me a story, which was, he loved to talk about his year in New Orleans. He worked at the Audubon Zoo, and he would tell crazy stories about that. And his favorite story to tell, and he told it to me more than twice or three times, was one night when he and Peter were at a party at Peter's, I think it was at Peter's art studio on Magazine Street. And there was a beautiful young woman named Krista who Charlie said, oh, she was a little bit heavy, but she was beautiful. And she was carrying around a jar of honey with mushrooms in it, some kind of magic mushrooms. And he said the music was playing really loud, and she would just go around the room and take these mushrooms out of the jar and put them in our mouths. And we were all just tripping our heads off and having such a great time. And, it sounded super fun. Like, I was always too scared to take drugs like that. But, I mean, I did have a boyfriend who was an opium dealer during that time. And I did try opium, which I gotta say was a pretty fun drug to smoke. Anyway, I don't want to encourage anybody. Anyway, so he would tell this story, and it was just kind of funny. Anyway, so about, a few years ago, Charlie really wasn't doing well, and I was really estranged from him, and Peter was estranged from him for sure. They had been best friends for many years, but Charlie ultimately did something that was very offensive, and Peter stopped being friends with him. And a few years ago, Peter and I became entangled with each other romantically, and we now live in New York together. And we made a very important decision, which was, we're not going to tell Charlie. He's going to be really upset. He will freak out. And so we kind of just didn't like not tell him, but neither one of us ran into him. We didn't really have any reason to tell him. So we just didn't tell him. We didn't want to disturb him. But, it was very beautiful to come together with somebody who you've known for close to 50 years. And you have a history together and so forth and so on. So, I moved to New York to live with Peter, and we've been together ever since. So, a couple of years ago, Charlie died. It was very, very sad, and it was very, very sad for my son. And he was such a really brilliant man who was just a little bit troubled. And anyway, so that kind of ended the whole, do we ever tell Charlie about this or not? We didn't, I figured, well, he's, on the other side now, he knows about it. So hopefully he's not too upset about it. So now I want to go back to the present. So Peter says, let's go to Galatoire's for lunch. So I'm like, all right. So we go to the front where the maitre d' is, the reservation person taking reservations. And we give them our name. And as we're standing there, this very beautiful, elegant woman walks up to me and she says, "Is that Peter?" And I said, "Yeah, it is Peter." And she said, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Krista." And I was like, "Are you the one with the glass jar and the mushrooms like 50 years ago at a party with Peter and Charlie Finch?" And she was like, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am." And I was like, I don't know, you can imagine what I was thinking. I was like, Jesus Christ. And then she and Peter began to talk. And I knew what it meant. It meant that Charlie was up there in heaven somewhere, pulling some strings, doing something. And it was his way of winking at us and saying, "I'm so happy you're together. I think it's fantastic." And it meant so much to me because to me it's such an affirmation of when you get delayed, there's a reason. You know, when things happen, trust in the universe to allow them to use space to create a meaningful experience for you. And she and Peter exchanged information. She's going to be visiting us in New York. And I can't wait to get to know her. She's also an artist, and she just seemed like a lovely woman. And she came over to our table and we chatted a little bit, but she had to go because she was having lunch with some friends. But it was extraordinary. And I'm going to say something funny, which is for anybody who watched that TV show Lost, I thought the best moment in the entire show was when Dominic telephoned Penny from the island and she answered the phone. That, to me, is the kind of feeling this had. So if you have listened to this whole thing, God bless you. And thank you for listening. And I'm curious if any of you have stories like that yourself. Ciao. Till next time.